In every conflict from the Revolutionary War through the war in Vietnam, the historic Springfield Armory played a critical role in arming U.S. troops with muskets, rifles, and other munitions. The Armory was known for its exemplary manufacturing methods, and during both World Wars, many of the people manning the machines were women. As we continue to celebrate Women's History Month, I sat down with Park Ranger Susan Ashman at the National Historic Site to learn more about the history and roles of the women workers who answered the call by joining the war effort at the Armory during both World War I and World War II.
During World War I, it was really interesting because there were no women here before April of 1917. So July 16th, 1917, the first woman was hired, and she was an inspector. And by the end of World War I, there was around 748 women who worked here. And there was hundreds who applied to work here. So that was really interesting too. And they kind of paved the way for women in World War II. So that is an interesting story too, because at first, not too many women were applying here. And so management was wondering why. And they actually went door to door in Springfield, like asking, why aren't you working at the Armory? It's your patriotic duty. And so come to find out, it was childcare that was lacking. And so the Armory opened a couple of childcare facilities because they needed that workforce here.
That's the first thing I thought about with the women. I said the men are off at war, but they still have the duties at home with the children and everything. So tell me more about some of the challenges that women faced moving to the workforce, but also having to tend to a home and children.
That was challenging because some of them did feel bad, but then others, wait, this is a time where they can be financially independent as well. And that was pretty new during that time, because we always get that picture of, June Cleaver, Leave It to Beaver, where they take care of the home. But that's not enough sometimes, and you need that income. And so it was perfect. It was right across the street to many. Some lived out different cities, and they would bus in here too. So that was huge, is mainly the financial independence that the Armory gave to a lot of these women.
And not only financial independence, when we were talking earlier, also like the social independence that they had, right?
Yes.
Tell me more about that new aspect that entered their lives.
Absolutely. The Armory was quite the social atmosphere. I had no idea until I read these Armory newsletters that were published in-house here during the war years. And so the publishers would encourage different employees in different departments to submit poetry, sporting events, the clubs, the teams, what's happening here at the Armory. And when you have just under 14,000 employees, you all don't know each other. There was basically 3 campuses here. So what are you doing at the Hill shops? Or what am I doing at the water shops? So this is a way for everybody, the news at the Armory. So I was so surprised to hear that they had a club for everything. I would have joined the lunch club, of course, but bridge and the Red Cross and such, but even sports teams. The sport, you name it, they had it here. And the most fascinating part to me was it was intramural sports. So the men would challenge the women in bowling and tennis, and it was pretty fascinating. And a lot of marriages came out of the Armory too.
And I know that at its wartime peak, according to your website, it was over 40% women here.
I thought it would be more because they talk about the men going off to war, but come to find out the men got deferments. So that skill was needed here. So then the women joined the forces here too, and it really changed the dynamics.
Tell me more about that, because you had women and men working side by side for the first time, equal jobs.
Right.
Was there any kind of resentment that came out of that, or was there appreciation? What was the tone?
It's a really good question, something we need to delve more into doing research here, but that started in World War I too, the women. So I think for the men, it was very different for them. And I think there probably was some resentment along the way. I don't even think they had women's bathrooms here initially. So a lot of changes, things we don't think of today. Again, those women during World War I paved the way for the women in World War II. And sure, there are some stories about, women taking the jobs of men, but then again, these positions needed to be filled. And it's interesting because the men, say if you're a machine operator, that man would step up and then train these women in these places. And there's this one woman, Mary Smith, she worked at the forge. I don't know why she wanted to work on the forge, because you took a test before you got hired here to see where you would do best. So just because maybe you wanted to be in administration does not mean that's where you would be. So you were tested, your dexterity too, your fingers, your physical tests were done, and Mary Smith ended up on the forge.
And so tell me more about some of those specific roles, because there were some dangerous jobs that these women were holding. What were they doing on the line in
Absolutely.
manufacturing?
So you could be like, there was clerks, there were administration,
Yep.
but there was also these women machine operators. They were at the forge, they were at the lathe, they were turning rifle stocks, they were putting trigger assemblies together. All those little pieces needed for the firearm, every little piece. They were working on that. They were inspectors. So it's not just these are men's jobs, these are women's jobs. No, the women were doing the jobs that the men were doing too.
And the way that you're dressed today for us has significance, and these women workers became known as WOWs, Women Ordnance Workers.
Right.
Tell me more about that movement and what came of that.
So that was basically just women who worked for Army Ordnance, not just at the Armory, but at different manufacturing plants. So if you worked with Army Ordnance, then you were a woman ordnance worker. And I think the best part of that is the bandanas that they wore. So we all know Rosie the Riveter. Everybody is so familiar with Rosie the Riveter, but not so the WOWs. And so Rosie has dots on her bandanas, but if you can see on mine, I have bombs. So no offense, Rosie, but I think the WOWs got something on you there. So.
Absolutely.
And that just went on. So if you were working here, you were a WOW.
And it boosts up morale too, to kind of have this uniform for women.
Absolutely, because it is a sad story where a lot of these women at first were getting their hair caught in the machines and stuff. They were wearing loose clothes, and the Army, said, hey, you have to wear tighter clothes, and you have to have either hats or have your hair tied up and stuff. So the Army came out with these bandanas, and they were so popular, and morale too. It was a great morale booster, because they figured the higher morale here, the better production is going to be with that. And it was true with that. So they came out with the bandanas. There was a dance here, the On to Victory dance in, I think, February of 1943. And that's when they gave out these bandanas. They would sign victory pledges. There was a dance that all three shifts could go to. So it was pretty neat.
I think it's safe to say that these women changed the workforce forever.
Absolutely.
Tell me about the long-term impact that this era had on us.
Truly, we can do it, right? So I think that really opened the doors. It gave the women the confidence that you can work a lathe, you can be an inspector. These roles are not just for men. You are capable. And again, I think it was the confidence that they could do that. And now look at what women are doing today. No doors are closed.